The Four Agreements, written by Miguel Ruiz, is by far one of my favorite books. The first agreement is to be impeccable with your words. Why? Because words have power. They do one of two things. They can unite us or divide us. My next guest is not only impeccable with his words, but he is intentional. He uses poetry to inspire, to motivate, to captivate, to provoke, and to bring awareness to his listeners. And today, he is here to share his journey and his spoken words right after this. What is mindset? Our mindset is based on what we believe, and anything we believe in, we put into motion. I have spent my life putting the mindset of perseverance into motion, and now I am here today to share my journey along with others whose mindsets have changed the course of their lives. Hi, I'm mindset coach Lorraine Lindsey, and I believe that if you can change your mind, you have the power to change your life. So are you ready? Welcome back to another episode of The Mindsetters, where we believe that if you can change your mind, you have the power to change your life. I am your host, Coach Lorraine Lindsey, a certified mindset and peak performance coach. And I am super excited for this guest that is getting ready to introduce. But before we introduce the guest, do not forget to hit the subscription button. Give us a thumbs up and send us your comments. I love hearing from you all, and I do thank you for the continued support. The show is growing, and I'm super excited. So without further ado, I want you to watch this video, and then I'm going to interview this next guest.
Lord, we are gathered here today in a sanctuary where being at a loss of words is seldom seen. We congregate with eager ears, anxious to receive anything hear-worthy. I thank you for selecting me as one of the conduits to do it. And I pray that you empower me with the memory to carry out that responsibility to a standard that you can stand proud for. Lord, I thank you for providing this art form as an outlet, something to plug into. In other words, a power source, a source of serenity, a source of soothing for open sores. You are the sorcerer who saw fit to fit me in this space, and I thank you for it every day. With tremendous gratitude, I pray. Amen, amen, and amen.
Spoken Words by Obbie West. So let me tell you a little bit about this gentleman that is gracing us with his presence today. Obbie West is Edward Wilson, affectionately known as Obbie West, is an international spoken word artist, advocate, and author. Originally from Los Angeles, California, Edward is a retiree from the United States Army. He began writing in 2011 and later published his first acclaimed book of poetry entitled Blossom. He travels the world as an educator, trainer, and speaker, using poetry to tackle topics such as sexual violence, prevention, and awareness. Edward has invested a personal and sincere interest in shifting the climate around sexual assault and harassment throughout the U.S. military, universities, and communities at large. His uncut, straightforward approach to poetry is thought-provoking, captivating, and serves as a call for action for all in attendance. Poetry isn't something I do. It is who I am. Poetry is first and foremost my liberation. Second, my bullhorn for topics society has elected to keep quiet. I am a conduit for the tongue-tied. Edward Wilson is the owner of Words of West, LLC, and is known primarily by his stage name, Obbie West. Obbie, thank you so much for gracing me with your presence. Before we get started, I came into your work and your talent by a couple people, actually. Prentice Powell and then Dom Waltower. And Dom was on the show a few months ago, and he said to me, Lorraine, if you have not heard of this man, you need to watch his words, his spoken words, see who he is. And the moment I went onto your social media, I was like, okay, I'm going to reach out. I don't know if he's going to respond, but I absolutely have to have him on the show. So first of all, thank you for coming. And that's all I have to say right there. So I'm a little nervous. I'm a little excited. Poetry is something that is super near and dear to my heart. When I was a little girl, I had a lot of adversities, and I actually used to write poems myself. My favorite was Shel Silverstein, Where the Sidewalk Ends. That was my first favorite childhood book, which is a book of poetry. And then, of course, I started learning Maya Angelou and learning to recite her poetry, and then became a big fan of someone by the name of Nikki Giovanni. So those were my poets growing up. So tell us a little bit about you and poetry and spoken word, and explain to people, because some people are not aware of what spoken word is. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Poetry, well, if we can, we'll address the last part first.
Okay.
Poetry traditionally has been recognized as someone standing in front of a podium. They have a sheet of paper on a slab and they're reading, and it's probably not digestible by a majority. They're talking about the stars has aligned with the moon. This is what people traditionally think about
Right.
when they think about poetry, right? Or think about Shakespeare when they think about poetry. Spoken word has more of a performance aspect to it, and there's more of creative aspect to it. So there's a lot of creative devices that are used in spoken word. So it's poetry. Poetry is the umbrella. Spoken word is just one of the subsidiaries that fall under that umbrella. So we don't want to separate them to where spoken word isn't poetry. There's
Right.
definitely poetry. It's just a way of doing poetry. So I do consider, even though I'm a spoken word artist, I'm a poet.
I feel like the adjective to spoken word, when it comes to intertwining with poetry, it is profound poetry. It really it brings it to life in a different kind of way, right? Because when I read poetry, I can put my own emotions into it. But to hear someone recite poetry and to make it a spoken word, it literally brings it alive in a way that if people have not experienced it, it's just absolutely captivating. So tell us how you came to this place of spoken word and poetry.
If I start from the root, I grew up in an abusive household, one. So there was a lot to unpack there. I grew up in a neighborhood that presented a lot of challenges. So there was a lot to unpack there. Then I grew up as a black man in the United States where there's a stigma, or there's a very unhealthy definition of masculinity that circulates that limits you from how you express yourself. You go through certain things, you keep those things to yourself. You talk about those things out loud and it can deteriorate your image, right? So we take all those things. We take the abusive household, we take the adverse conditions in this neighborhood, and then we take being a man. And I joined the Army, I left home about 17.
Okay.
And I joined the military. After being in the military for about 10 years, I went to this place that was advertised as a comedy show. But when I went, I learned that it was an open mic.
Nice.
And the people who signed up on the open mic were poets. I didn't know what an open mic was, nor did I have any relationship or familiarity with poetry at the time. I went to see the comedian. But
Interesting.
But when the poets went on stage, like what you were talking about, there was just this emotional liberation, right? It was, if I'm talking to you and I say something to you that you have a different opinion about, you have the space to kind of cut me off, rebut, give your opinion. But if I'm standing on this stage, it's a one-way conversation. You're just forced to listen to me. There's no threat of me being interrupted. There's a freedom to be emotional there that men, because of that definition of masculinity, don't have the freedom to express in a one-on-one setting. I can express it on the stage, right? And it also allowed me to, in the beginning, it allowed me to hide behind things that I may not have wanted to express in a personal space, right? Because you don't know if it's about me or if he's just reciting a poem. So in the beginning, it was kind of a shield, but it was absolute liberation, and it was a way to unpack everything that I had been through prior to that point. And when I started doing poetry, I didn't know that I would be using it in that way. But after about a year of going over my catalog, that's what it turned out to be.
What's fascinating is that, a lot of times when I'm on the show here and I talk to people, one of the things I get asked quite often is, how do I discover my purpose? How do I know what my purpose is? And like what you just said, you went to see a comedian, some comedy, to get some laughter, and yet something was birthed out of that experience. And so how did you know in that moment? Did you know in that moment? Or what was it about that where you're like, there's an open mic and someone doing spoken word or poetry? What was it about that for you that you realized that was something in you that you maybe wanted to pursue?
In the beginning, it was fun. It was something I enjoyed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Later on, as it began to progress, then I learned that it was a part of my purpose. At first, I thought poetry was my purpose, but it's just a part. I now think that my purpose is people. It's investing in people, and poetry is just a vehicle that allows me to do that.
Love that.
Right? So when it comes to a purpose for me, it's something that's innate. Even when you're not trying to do it, there's times where I'll sit down, I'll start writing a poem about something frivolous just to have fun with it. And the poem has no set direction when I start. It just takes direction as I'm writing it. By the end of the poem, I've turned this frivolous point into an analogy to address something serious about life. Now it's something that can be used to help someone. So even when I'm not intending to invest in people, it turns out that way, right? There's some things we do where no matter how taxing the logistics is in order to get to it, the transportation, all those things, we're willing to go to it because of the fulfillment of what we actually have to do. So there's an absolute fulfillment in what I do, which then allows me to recognize it as being my purpose. When I first started doing it, it was very hard for me to charge. I felt guilty for charging.
I can relate to that,
It's like if my daughter says, "Daddy, I want to pay you for fathering me." I would feel guilty for accepting it because I feel like that's my innate responsibility. So it felt like my innate responsibility to do what I was doing. So it was very hard for me to charge, right? So I think you add all those things together and you start to recognize, okay, this thing is way too natural. And when people say, just take a break, take a vacation away from what I would do will feel more like torture than a vacation. What I do on a daily basis is vacation, right? So I think whenever something feels like that, then you know this has to be why I'm on earth.
That is so profound, and I'm so glad you said that because, you know, Oprah talks about that. She said, what is that thing you would do for free, right? And for me, even doing this podcast and doing public speaking and really this whole mindset thing, it is something that I wake up thinking about it. I go to bed thinking about it. When I was in other careers and doing other things in my life, I didn't know how to make it a platform, make it a thing that I could, you know, monetize so I could do it more. But it was just something that kept calling in my life. And like you, it was something that I stumbled across. I didn't really know what the word life coach or motivational speaker or any of that thing, especially because I don't look at myself as such. I look at someone as just has a story, has a background, has some adversities in her life. And I had to use a mindset to overcome because statistically, I wasn't supposed to make it, you know? Right. So tell us about how you went from the mic or going to this open mic thing. What was the next thing for you? Were you still in the military at that time or were you out of the military?
I was in the military.
Okay. So then when you go to this thing, you get this call. What's the next thing that you did? I mean, how did you pursue it from there?
I was just aggressive. I was aggressive in doing what I like to do. I wasn't aggressive because I felt like I was going to make it a career. It was just something I enjoyed, right? It was something I enjoyed and I wanted to do it as often as I can do it. So that turned into opportunities. Even if I wasn't looking for the opportunity, just continuously being present in what I enjoy doing started to turn into opportunities. Someone showed me how you can use this platform in order to address these issues that you're always writing about. You're writing about all these issues, but then you go into a nightlife club and people are sitting there and they're holding hands and they're sitting across from their loved ones and there's candles lit. And then you get up there and say, "Don't rape." And they're like, "Hey, wait, you ruining?" You know what I mean?
Right.
So
you're
it's
like,
okay.
So
there's actually a space to where you can use this. And so they showed me how I can use it in that space. And that's when I learned, okay, the purpose isn't poetry like you and I. It sounds like we have the same purpose. Our purpose is people.
Right.
My platform is poetry. Your platform is
speaking and podcasting.
Absolutely, right. So that's when I finally learned, okay, so maybe poetry isn't the purpose, but the purpose is people. But it was just me consistently being present in what it was I enjoyed to do.
Gosh, that's so true. You're absolutely right. When you are obedient to the call, right, and you follow that purpose because it's calling, and I'm saying this and I'm repeating this because, again, when people ask the question, what's my purpose or where do I start or how do I do this? It's like, just be obedient to the call. Because when you start to march to that and walk in the light of that, things come to you, people come to you, and they give you the guidance and the avenues in which you can, you know, create the construct where it actually reaches the people.
Right.
So when you say that your purpose is people, what do you mean by that?
I mean, there's I I feel like there's people, there's social issues, there's individuals who are dealing with things, and anything unspoken will go unaddressed. If you and I are in a relationship, we're in the same household, and I have a problem with something you're doing, how long would it take to be addressed if I never mention it?
Right.
It'll never go addressed, right? So these things have to be addressed or have to be talked about in order for them to be addressed. And there's people who their only voice is probably in my voice box, right? You know what I mean? They don't really have. I was sitting on an airplane one day, and there was a guy sitting next to me. If I had to guess, he was probably about 65. His wife was by the window, and we're sharing this armrest, and I feel him shaking. And then I look over, and his head swaying. And then I say, okay, he has Parkinson's or something, right? And then I'm thinking to myself, I wonder how many settings he go into and he feels like he's in a fishbowl because people who aren't familiar with this condition are just staring at him, right? So I started writing a poem about Parkinson's from the perspective of a person who has Parkinson's. And I think I was done with the poem before the plane landed. And he went to the restroom, and baggage claim, I walked over to his wife and I said, hey, this is something I did. Can I have an email address? She said, yeah. She gave me an email address. I sent it to him, and he sent me back a message talking about the appreciation and how many people aren't aware of it. And then I started doing the poem. And when I started doing the poem, there was receptions from individuals who was dealing with that thing and didn't know how to let people know how severe it was. So I say that to say, I think there's some of us who are in a position to stand in a gap for people who are dealing with something, but don't have the ability or the platform to address it. So we go out and we scout those problems and we say, okay, I'll address it on your behalf so that we can bring awareness to it so that it can be addressed, right?
Love that.
So when I say, back to your root question, when I say that my purpose is people, I think my purpose is just kind of being, again, a conduit or a medium that addresses these issues.
Or a voice.
Right.
Right.
That addresses these issues that need to be addressed, but the individuals who are dealing with the issues might not have an ability to address them for whatever reason.
So I'm going to go specifically to some of the things that you specifically speak to. You speak in front of military and other people, for that matter, about sexual violence and harassment and things like that. Why choose that as a platform to speak about? What was it that motivated you to say, let me be a voice to this?
You're saying to that topic or to
that
that
that topic,
and
to the people you speak to about it.
Well, the people I speak to about it, that was kind of inherent. I was in the military for 21 years. When I started doing poetry, I was in the military. During the time I was in the military, someone from the military who didn't know I was in the military, they learned of me through social media, but they only learned of me as a poet.
Gotcha.
And this lady was living in Alaska, and she contacted me. She said, I'm part of the military. I'm in charge of this program. I want to know if you can kind of write a poem. I want to do something different to spice up my program. And I wrote a poem from the perpetrator's perspective that's addressing sexual assault.
Wow.
And it's explaining, this is what you are subconsciously doing in order to allow me to be successful as a perpetrator. So it drives a self-assessment. What are we doing to contribute to the problem? And I sent it to her, and that turned into them flying me to Alaska to do it. Then someone in Hawaii see it, and they flew me to a military installation in Hawaii, and I'm still in the military. So then I wrote.
And at this time, do they know that you're in the military?
They know now.
At this point,
they know now.
Okay.
So my organization, my military organization, is agreeing to let me do this, and they're paying government travel for me to go do it. So then I learned, okay, there's a way to address these topics from the inside. So I generated an entire presentation, but I wasn't allowed to do the presentation while I was in the military. So once I retired, those same people who had learned of me in the military was like, hey, you're retired, you're a civilian now. It's not a conflict of interest for us to pay you to do a presentation. Come back and come talk to these soldiers. So because I was in the military at first, it was kind of an easy transition to start training for them. Now, the topic itself, going back to childhood, I grew up in a household where there was abuse. I wasn't the one being abused, but I'm witnessing abuse to someone who I love, and the collateral damage of being helpless when watching someone be abused and you can't do anything about it. Then the conflict of loving the abuser. You know what I mean? So now it's like, am I portraying the person who's being abused by me loving the abuser? But I have to love the abuser, they're a parent, right? So the conflict of dealing with all that and remembering how it feels to be hopeless in that situation, it put me in a position to where it was important for me to invest what I could to see that we could mitigate that problem as much as possible moving forward for other people. If it's just awareness on how to recognize a trauma bond, or if it's a different way to just anything that might help a person be better prepared to face an issue.
It's powerful and it's relatable for me because I grew up in an abusive home. And I actually spoke about it recently about my attraction to certain relationships as an adult and not realizing I always had this mantra that I was never going to be that girl until I was that girl. And really having to look at self and reflect and say, why is it that I'm attracting these types of relationships for my life? And to your point, part of the problem was I would watch and witness abuse as it was bestowed upon my mother, but I had a way of compartmentalizing it because the abuser was the abuser to my mother, but was a hero to me.
Right.
And so having that conflict, finding that it was, in my mind, synopsis for a relationship, I found myself with people who I wanted to rescue me at the same time that they were abusing me, and realizing that this is something that was witnessed and learned as a child growing up.
Right.
And really coming to that realization for me to help self and to have better choices for my life without feeling like a victim.
Right.
So I don't look at the things that have happened in my life from a perspective of a victim. I don't feel disempowered in that way.
Right.
This is just a story that has happened. But for you to be able to take your own adversities growing up and to not only speak about it, but to speak about it in a poetic way, I mean, that's pretty deep. So how do you tap in? Because I was looking at some of you have I love what you do on your social media. You have a lot of you do questions that people ask you. And one of the questions that someone had asked you was, do you write poetry with intention for a platform and stuff? And you answered basically, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm not being verbatim here, but that you just let your poetry come to you like naturally. So how do you get inspired when you're speaking on such heavy topics to write the poetry, or is it already just kind of there? I don't know if I'm asking the question correctly, because it's deep, it's heavy, but it's relevant and it needs to be talked about. How do you do it in a way that's poetic? I guess is my question.
If I give you an answer, I'll be making it up, right? I can't, of all the poems that I have specifically addressing these issues, I can't remember what happened, what the motivation was that influenced any of those poems. I'll give you an example. There's times where I'm real big into creative writing.
Okay.
Right? So the message is always first. But if I could figure out a way to make that message sonically sound good, then I'm into that too. So if I can create these relationships between syllables that sounds extremely clever, but I don't lose the message, then best for me. So I can be writing a sentence, and in order for this sentence to sound the way I want it to sound, I need a word that sounds like this. And I'll know a word in my head, but I don't know what it means. Like, this word would fit perfectly here, right? And then I'll look the word up, and it'll have the exact meaning that it needs to have in order to push that. That's bigger than me, right?
Right.
So I never sit down and say, today I'm going to write about this. I never do that. I'll be driving in a car, and I'll literally hear a line, and I'll write that line down, then I'll hear the next one, then I'll write that line down, I'll hear the next one. And when I stop hearing lines, I stop writing, and it just sits in my phone. And then maybe 2-3 months later, I'll start reading unfinished thoughts in my phone, and I'll come across one, and then I'll hear another line, then I'll start writing. And at some point, those things become completed thoughts. I give them a title, I save them somewhere else. So if I told you, I just sit down and I'll be lying.
Okay. I love that.
I
love that.
And I write
truth.
it down. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's like you have very specific messaging in certain things. And so you would think that you were intentional about saying, okay, I'm going to sit here, I'm going to write this poem. But I love that it's just spiritual in a way. It just comes to you in a divine way, which I think is very magical. And I love that you're honest and transparent about that. Because I think for people who are inspired, and I'm certain there are many people that you inspire to write poetry, or to just be true to whatever art form they have. It's just to allow it to be innate and natural. And it's funny you say that because I write a lot for speaking. I always have these speeches in my head, and not necessarily places to speak on these topics. But to your point, I keep a notebook but near my shower because I think a lot in the shower. When I wake up, sometimes there's things on my mind. So I always just write things or do voice notes on my phone. And so I thought I was the only one that did crazy stuff like that. But I love it because it's so organic. What are some of your more favorite things to write poetry about? And so when you first started writing poetry, what was the thing that moved you at that time?
I think we go back now. We're going back to where we started. The first poem that I wrote was called Dear Poetry, right? And that was right after I went to that event. And I asked the guy, how can I do this? He said, come back next month and you can sign up on the open mic. So within 30 days, I wrote 2 of what I consider as poems.
Okay.
And the first one was called Dear Poetry. But after that, I don't remember anything I wrote up into a poem called A Little Girl's Cries. It was about a little girl who was being sexually abused by a step-parent, right? So early on, there was just a lot of, I was writing poems about refrigerator abuse, like people who couldn't stay out of the refrigerator. And it was resulting in self-imposed abuse because their bodies was transforming negatively. So anything that was geared, I don't know why, that was not my intent when I started writing poetry, to be addressing abuse. So then it shifted from that to a surplus of love poems, right? I would write love poems. So in the beginning, I think that's what it was. It was just a bunch of those things, and then it just became a conglomerate of everything, like anything that's anything. Like I've written poems about how irritating that voice is inside the self-checkout machine at Walmart. Right?
You just did that recently.
Right.
Yeah.
I wrote that poem maybe like 4 years ago.
I love it. That was the one that you did upside down, right? Or was that the poem that you did?
No, that poem was about something else, and I don't know why it was upside down. Instagram did that.
Oh, really?
I put it online and I clicked post and I put my phone down and went to sleep. This was like 3 a.m. I wake up at like 7 a.m. and I look at my Instagram and I'm flipped. I'm like, what is this?
Yeah.
And
I thought it was cool. I thought you did it
I love the way you flipped it. And I was like, nah.
Oh, it was meant to be that way.
But
one of my favorite poems that you have, and it's very short and to the point, but it's the one about loving yourself. And it's like maybe 30 seconds long and you're like, and at the end you're like, and that's it. And I actually played that over a few times because I'm like, this is such a beautiful thing to say to self. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
No clue.
It's the one, you to yourself.
Okay. I think I know what you're talking about.
And it's a message for you to yourself about you are beautiful, you are amazing.
I know what you're talking about.
And I was like, gosh, it's so simply said. It's so beautifully said, but it's so powerful because we don't say those kind of things to ourselves. And so I personally, I love the simplicity, but the power behind the simplicity in that message. So what, when you go, because you're on tour quite a bit, I mean, you've got all kinds of things lined up. Yeah. When you go to these open mics and these events, how do you know what to speak about? Or do you have certain things that you choose to talk about, or do you just kind of, are you off the cuff when you speak live? I'm coming to see you in July when you're here in Vegas, by the way.
Right. No, I'm not off the cuff at all. If the event is themed, it's a Valentine's Day, I'll follow the theme.
Okay.
But if it's not themed, there was a point where I was writing at a rate that was a lot faster than my ability to present it because I was in the military.
Okay.
So 5 days a week, that organization had me. On the weekends, I could probably go find somewhere, but I was writing all the time. So these poems are building up at a faster rate. So in saying that, I have this many poems and 90% of them still sit in the closet with tags on them. They've never been recited before.
Wow.
So when I go to places, one, I try to figure out what can I do that I hadn't done before. Second, how do I create an experience for the individuals who's watching versus them just watching me recite a poem? How do I pour into them so that when they leave, they feel empowered in some kind of way? How can I construct a set that does that? And I try to do that. I try to go through the range of emotions, something that's going to be inspiring, something that's going to be a little touching, something that might be a little funny, something that might be a little, how can I go through that range of emotions? You ever watch a movie and through that movie, you've done it all? You've laughed, you've cried,
right.
You've wondered, you've been intrigued, you've jumped. And when you left, you're like, whew, that was it. So how do I create that within a set? So with that thought process, I just go start picking and pulling poems. And some of them might be 5, 6 years old, and some of them might be written yesterday. And I just try to put a set together that's going to be somewhat cohesive, but enlarge something that's going to be an experience, a positive experience or a progressive experience for the people who listen.
And it's not just the words, it's also the way the delivery. So tell us about the importance of that. Because spoken word, like we said earlier, it's delivery. There's a group right now that I love, Tank and the Bangers. Are you familiar with them? There are two girls and they have a band behind them, and they're from New Orleans. And they incorporate hip hop with spoken word, with some musicality. And it is so profound and just moving and all of that. But it's delivery. It's the timing. Yeah. It's when they use spoken word versus when she does a little bit of hip hop or when she throws in her ballad, you know? So how important is it for you with using spoken word to have the ability to have the delivery? And do you use music in your background too? Do you do all of that, or is it just you delivering in different tonations?
Yeah, it's just me.
Wow.
It's just me. I think delivery is just as important as what you're saying, right? It's the difference between you watching me talk and me talking to you. So if I'm just standing there and I'm looking in the sky and I'm just letting you watch me talk, there may be a certain amount of something you can pull from that. But if I'm sitting on a stool and I'm looking at you and I'm reciting a poem in a conversational tone, now you feel like I'm talking to you. Now you're more receptive. So I used to stand up when I did poems and I would lose control of my body, right? It was something about the power of the poem to where I would become fidgety, hand be flailing in ways that has nothing to do with what I'm saying. You know what I mean? And I started sitting down. So now I sit on a stool and it makes it extremely conversational. There's rarely an instance to where you're talking to somebody and they're not in the same position you in. If I'm talking to you, normally we're both sitting down and we're both standing up, right? If you're standing up and I'm sitting down, there's a superiority and inferiority thing somewhere. So I try to put myself in the same position as the people who are listening.
Makes sense.
So I sit down. And when I sit down, it allows me to slow down. It allows me to recite the poem the exact same way I'm talking to you. And now the people who are listening, they feel more invested because they don't feel like they're watching me talk. They feel like I'm talking to them. So now the message resonates more. So I think the delivery is just as important as the message. The message can be complete. There's been some beautiful messages that no one got because of delivery. Right. So, and there's been some messages that have been kind of substandard, but the delivery was powerful. So it made you feel like the message was about something, right? So at the end of the day, the delivery is of optimal importance.
Why? What is your why behind this? Like, I know you said that you are a servant to people. Your purpose is people. But what has really, truly, is that, or maybe that is what it is, but really compelled you to live through your purpose and live in your purpose? Do you feel like this is your purpose, truly? Yeah.
People ask me, what do you want to do? I tell them, what I want to do, I'm doing it like right now. I just want to keep doing it, right? So aside from people, it's the fulfillment. Like for me, life is rooted around peace of mind, right? If I don't care what you have possession-wise, if you don't have peace of mind, you're likely to put a slip knot around your neck, right? So that's what it does for me. It's absolute peace of mind for me to be able to write, be able to recite poems. So that's my why, aside from anything external to me, people, but it's peace of mind. It's my source of peace of mind. You remember back in the 90s, everybody didn't have cell phones, and it was no big deal. We figured it out. But now you think back, like, how the hell was we functioning with no cell phone?
Right.
That's how I feel about, like, what was I doing before I started doing poetry?
That is actually interesting, yeah.
I don't know how I was functioning, right? And since I've started doing it, it's become like my lung.
Do you feel like it was always in you, though? Then you weren't tapped in?
Had to be. I don't know.
Right.
I think it was one of those things to where when I started doing poetry, the thing that made money for me became hard to do. Like, I'm in the military. That's what's feeding me. That's what's taking care of my daughter. At the time I was married, that's what's taking care of my wife. That's what's providing.
Right.
Then I started doing poetry. The military was slowing down the rate at which I could do poetry. Poetry ain't making me a dime. I wanted to get out the military so I can go do something that's not making me a dime.
I can so relate to that.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when I learned about poetry, the thing that was actually sustaining me wasn't even important. So the fulfillment was more important than the sustainment. But I had already been in the military over 10 years. So I only got 6, 7 left. I got to muscle through this so I can retire. But if I would have learned about poetry at 5 years in the military, I would have bounced.
You're right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so I think it's one of them things where God was like, you got something going. I ain't going to let you know what it is, though. If I let you know what it is, you're going to make a stupid decision. You're going to be sleeping in the back of cars.
I can so relate to that.
Yeah.
I call it provision over purpose. And I've been down that pathway. I worked in a corporate environment. I made a lot of money doing what I did. And it was very much provisional, right? And it was a blessing. It helped me as a single mother provide for my son and let him, live the life that he's living today as a young man. But man, when purpose hit me, when I knew what that call was, it was so hard to go and do that provisional work. Yeah. It was so difficult to the point where I said, okay, I can't be hasty because this provision, this job is a blessing. I have to understand, as much as I no longer feel like it's serving me or whatever, I still need to be obedient to the fact that it is a blessing in my life, and I need to be mindful of that and do my job. But then I became very intentional about how I was going to get out of it. Right. And so I put plans in motion, and I prepared myself longer than I wanted to feel that I could build at least a nest egg to see what could happen if I just followed my heart. Right. I needed to know in life, and people say, I'm like, I don't know how long I'm going to be on this earth, but I need to know for however long I'm going to be here that I was obedient to a call. Right. Whether it works out or not, I'm okay with that. But I can't leave this earth not knowing. And so so I so relate to you in so many ways, even when you talk about your childhood and stuff. So you're not in the military any longer then, I assume. Are you retired from the military?
Retired.
You were Army?
19.
But yet you're still in there somehow speaking to military. So we got a couple pictures of you speaking to military personnel. What's that like for you to be a civilian, talking heavy topics, really, right? And bringing awareness to certain things amongst people that were your, I don't know, colleagues, is that the right word?
Colleagues, superiors, subordinates. Yeah, there were a lot of things to me.
What's that like for you to be in that space?
It's extremely fulfilling. One is because it was in the military, and I know what that program looks like. Mm-hmm. For different branches of the military, it has different names. For the Army, the Sexual Assault and Harassment Prevention Program is called SHARP. For the Air Force, it's called SAPR. But it's all the same program, different names, right? Okay. And I have been in the military where that program didn't move me, right? It was inundated with data, and you intake the data, and the training felt redundant to me. But I always knew it was important. Right. So to now go back and be able to invest in that same program so that now the importance shows is beneficial to me. Right. It's like seeing a problem and you can't do anything about it, then later putting yourself in a position to do something about that problem. Right.
That's powerful.
Right. So that's beneficial. That feels good. Another thing that's fulfilling is, and this has nothing to do with the program, it just has something to do with how I show up. Say if I go to an event, and there's 20 speakers, and we all have 30 minutes apiece. All my counterparts are gonna have on suits and ties and whatever else, and clean cut. And there's a stigma that people see you before they hear you. Right. And they make judgment based off what they see before they hear you. And a lot of times we're discredited because of how we look. I've been blessed enough to create a space for myself where I don't have to care about that. I'm going to show up and look the way I want to. They got on church shoes. I got on Chucks. I got piercings sticking out my nose, ears. I be having spikes in my ears, hair standing up on top of my head, and I know there's a perception when I walk in. But when you present a body of information that's undeniable, all of a sudden, nothing you even look like matters. Right. So at the end of the day, what it does is it tells people, you know what, I was wrong. When that person walked in, I was extremely judgmental. So now they might be more receptive of the next person that doesn't look the way that they think they should. So just being able to create a space to where people who want to aesthetically look the way they want to now have a freedom to still look that way and still be recognized as intelligent, that's fulfilling as well.
God, I love the intention behind that, about shifting perception. That's powerful. Because it's an unspoken word, right? Right. And through your spoken word, you shift a perception. Because you're exactly correct. I mean, it's like people judge. It's just all of us are guilty of judging people before they even speak. And so I love that you become invisible and invincible all at the same time through your word.
Right.
So what do you see yourself like? Where do you see yourself as far as your poetry, your spoken word? You actually have an album. You've made a few albums, I saw.
Yeah.
Is that something you want to explore more? I mean, where do you see yourself? Because, I mean, the sky's the limit really for you.
As it pertains to intellectual property, like albums and books, those things were spawned out of pressure. Like my daughter wrote a book when she was 15. I'm like, how she got a book and I ain't got a book, right? So I wrote a book because she had a book, and then she wrote another one. I'm like, nah, you can have it, right? So that was out of pressure. And then the album, it was just one of those things where people, when they ask, you have an album, and at some point, you can't, no, I don't. You gotta, you know what I mean? So it was people who were asking to appreciate you. I'm asking you to do something so I can go out and appreciate you, and you won't do it. So I did an album. And then the second album, Unstable Man, there was a guy named J. Ivy. J. Ivy, first out, huge shout out to J. Ivy. He's the first poet who won a Grammy for a spoken word album just recently. So 2 years ago, he called me and he said, hey, listen, we finna do this category for the Grammys, put an album together. So I was super busy. I think I was home for about 5 days. And while I was home, I called the studio. I was like, hey, I need to put an album together. So I went to that studio in like 5 days. I put the album together so I can submit it for the Grammys. But at that time, Obama, Dave Chappelle was still in our category.
Dave Chappelle, Don Cheadle, I think he won the Grammy that year too,
they were
right?
Still in our category.
Yeah.
So there's no way that we was walking out of there with a Grammy.
That's so funny you brought that up because people don't realize that. I mean, spoken word has been recognized on the Grammy since 1959.
Right, just not in its pure form.
Right,
it was just anything with no music.
Right,
so you had audio books like Michelle Obama had an audio book.
Right.
And if the Grammys have an opportunity to sit one person in the audience, it's not going to be me if it can be her.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So regardless of what the body of work sounds like, what's going to be more marketable for this broadcast? You know what I mean?
Right.
So this year was the first time it's been pure, and J. Ivy won.
Which I love that.
Yeah. I hadn't heard his album, but personally, I don't care what his album sounds like. I think all the work he put in to make sure that this was a category, he deserves the first one. His album could have had one song, and it could have been written in crayon with no vocal. I still think he deserves to have this first.
Because like you said, it's
Grammy.
bringing the true light to it.
Yeah.
You know, it's fascinating. I'm so happy because I've been hearing more about it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, in its true form of what spoken word really is. And I love that it's getting the real recognition.
Right.
And so when you mentioned the pressure, because you are just like you were saying earlier, it all just kind of comes to innately and you write it. And if it doesn't need to be finished, you don't finish it. But then how do you, because people are going to want more from you, right? Mm-hmm. Like you said, they want to show their appreciation for your artistry. How do you handle the pressure then of putting something together in a time frame when people want and need that from you?
I don't do it according to their time frame.
Okay.
I acknowledge that there's a demand, and then I fulfill that demand when it's comfortable for me.
Okay.
Right? So I just acknowledge that there's a demand, but I don't do, everybody has a different time frame. And I think one of the biggest mistakes we make in life is trying to satisfy everybody else's time frame.
Right.
And the time frame that don't get satisfied is our own. So I just acknowledge, okay, there's a demand.
Well, like for example, when you got called and said, we need an album for the Grammys.
Yeah. Now, for that, it was one of those things to where this is an opportunity that's extremely unique. So you're going to be home for 5 days. What are you going to do in those 5 days that can be more important than probably nothing? So go to the studio and do some poems, right? So that was one of those things that because of how unique that situation was, it was a call for action. Let's go get it done. But aside from that, it's just, okay, I acknowledge that this is something that people require. It's something that I don't mind doing. I don't, if I don't do it, I don't do it, but I don't mind doing it. So when the time permits and when it feels good, I'll do it. But I just can't go recite 7 poems and put them on an album. I have to feel good about doing it. About which ones those are.
Is that a fear then? I mean, when there becomes timetables and obligations and a need of saying, we need you to fill this, or we need this album. Is there some type of fear that if that becomes such a obligation to you, they don't make you become disinterested in your craft?
No, I think it's up to us as the individuals to control that. There's going to be pressure. The decision we have is how we respond to that pressure. If we respond to the pressure in a way that it starts to rip our peace of mind away, it starts to become more taxing, then our thing will start to feel like a job.
Right.
But if we have a way to shielding that pressure and just saying, hey, I got you. I hear you. It's coming. And just still do it at our pace, then we allow ourselves to still exercise our passion within our comfort level, then it doesn't become a job. So whether it becomes a job is up to us, how we submit to that pressure.
See, I struggle with that because there's a fine line for me personally with accountability to getting something done and procrastination because of my own fears that get in the way. Sometimes I have a little bit of imposter syndrome. I know it's a call. I know it's something that I just can't let go of. It's in me and I just can feel it. But there are times when I think I'm going to get up and do a speech and people are gonna like, who is this girl? Or even like, for example, me reaching out to you and saying, he's going to look at me and be like, well, who is she? Why am I going to, and then you obliged me. And
I did look at you and say, who is she? But then I came.
Yeah, but then you showed up, right? And so, and thank you for that. But I guess for me, I need to learn that, like what you're saying is that to not succumb to the pressure, because I do that sometimes and then it overwhelms me and then I just want to curl up in a little ball and kind of go away.
Right.
But what I realize is that once the momentum takes off and people start to know you and see you and to hear you, it's like a wildfire. It just kind of catches, especially when you know it's just a call in your life.
Right.
It's not like I'm doing it because I want to be on a platform or I want to be popular or have followings. It's great, but it's not what my mission is,
Right.
And so, yeah, learning to have the boundaries and make it on my own time. That's good. I need to hear that.
Yeah, I bet if you look back, I would venture to say if you look back at everything that you stuck your hand in since day one, that those things that you did your diligence for, that rarely they failed, right?
That's true, yeah.
But still, we're still afraid of the next thing. Even though our track record is beautiful, we still afraid to start that next thing. So one thing I'm always going to be successful at, I'm going to be successful at trying every time.
I love that.
Even if the outcome doesn't turn out the way I want to, I probably learned something throughout the process. So if nothing else happens, I'm going to learn something. But I'm going to always be successful at trying it. I just look at it as there's going to be a time frame where it's going to be our last day. And we're going to be sitting there thinking about everything we did. And we're going to have a whole bunch of, man, I remember when I tried that and this happened. Or we're going to have a whole bunch of, I wonder what would have happened if I tried this. I'm not doing I wonder what would have happened. I'm not doing that. I'm doing, I remember when I tried this and it blew up. Right?
That's so good.
That's what I'm going to do. I'd rather talk about my failures than talk about what I ain't do because I was scared.
I love that. That's a poem in and of itself.
You should
write it. I will always be successful at trying.
Yeah.
But all you have to do is try.
That's it. I think it's just very important to stay present in your thing. Stay present in and that's something, like you said, at some point those opportunities are going to come. But if you're shying away from things because you're scared, then you're not allowing yourself to stay present. And just stay present in your thing. If you pick anybody that do anything and you pick the greatest person, pick the greatest basketball player, pick the greatest anything, and they got a surplus of failures. And we still
that is so true.
And we still calling them the greatest.
That is so true. Because how else can you become the greatest?
You can't.
If you haven't had the failures to come along with it. It's impossible. Right? I love that. Man, it just comes out of you, huh? Okay, so how do people find you? How do people listen to you? Tell them every which way they can and find out and discover and listen to Mr. Obbie West.
Okay, first off, whoever takes this information and uses it, thank you in advance. But everything is Obbie West. Instagram is Obbie West. The spelling is Obbiewest. The most common misspelling is Obie.
So double B.
Yeah, Obbiewest on LinkedIn, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. If you follow me on Twitter, that's where I just absolutely give myself permission to be unintelligent. Right. So there's nothing valuable on Twitter. It's just, Twitter's like dancing naked in the kitchen and nobody's home. That's how it feels. So Christian Mingle, no, I don't have a Christian Mingle page, but yeah, it's Obbie West on every platform. I do have an album called Unstable Man, which is the latest album on most of the streaming sites. It's definitely on the two popular ones, which is Spotify and Apple Music. There's also an audio book called Blossom. That's the book that was inspired by my daughter writing a book. And then there's two other albums. Listen, I don't even remember the name of them. But
there's one that has the illustration on the front of it. It's got your mind open.
That's Blossom.
That's Blossom.
That's the audio book.
Yeah,
Blossom.
I love the illustration on that.
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
That's the audio book Blossom. So those are the two most prominent things that I have on streaming sites is Unstable Man and Blossom. Website is www.obbiewest.com.
And I love on your Instagram, you always have updates on your tours, where you're going to be. I know, like I said, in July, you're going to be here in Vegas. So I'm definitely going to be there. I cannot wait to see you live. Not to put you on the spot, but do you want to give us a little poetry before we go?
Let's see. Let's see what I can get through once. It's amazing having a mind with amaze in it. Right? Me personally, I can spend days in it. I navigate it easily, but when others gaze in it, it's hazy. And they ask, hey, is he crazy? Just maybe, but he can't be because he speaks so sensibly. See, it's like nobody gets me. Even family feels that I'm unfamiliar. They say he's a locked vault with a lost combination. And trying to get in is like trying to open a high security safe with a shoelace. He just strings us along, but he never comes ajar. He's a jar with this tinted glass and a tightened top that don't twist off, and he gets pissed off when he's questioned. He only answers to his seed, his daughter, Brooklyn Elise. At least she has the key, but we were sort of kept at arm's reach, and we're wondering, why is this? Maybe he needs to see a psych visit because he speaks in images, but his feelings aren't quite vivid, and we got a feeling that he's hoarding hard times in the basement of his belly, and we're afraid that if he doesn't purge, hell will emerge. We can't read him. He's written in Arabic. He's a man grenade that doesn't talk. He just writes, and he just might explode if you pull his pen. He carries Colorado winters in his chest. His sentiments are like icicles, which you call cold. He calls a coping mechanism. And what's even colder is we're starting to think that he's a cutter. Not himself, but others. He cuts folks off like bad traffic, and if he feels like you're at his neck, he'll cut ties. And we're lost at how he's so copacetic. We're lost. And we can't tell if he loves because he carries the emotions of a dead emoji. We couldn't even contract U-Haul to move him.
Wow.
So what do you do when the only way that you know to live has been killing those that you live for? When all your loved ones have thrown in their hand because they can't win with the way you do? When your hard face is considered as heartless, when you're the black sheep and not even your shepherd knows how to receive you.
Wow. Unreal. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
So deep. So beautiful. Wow. Thank you, Obbie. For those of you who are not moved, then I don't know where you're sleeping under a rock or something, but thank you, Obbie, so much. And again, if you want to see Obbie live, he has a list of his tours on his Instagram at Obbie West. And again, you can find him on all of his social media, Obbie West. And thank you so much for gracing us with your presence. You are a powerhouse, and the energy is contagious. So thank you, and I can't wait to see you perform live.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you guys again for watching another episode of The Mindsetters. Again, if you've watched the entire interview, do not forget to hit the subscription button. And until next time, ciao.